How do we clean our lens in a cult that is committed to emotional illiteracy, to psychological illiteracy? How do we talk? Well, I turn to camera because this camera has not interrupted me. You notice that? I do not know a single American in the country who I can call up or show up to and say, I'm ready to begin and share this. And they're like, okay, take as much time as you need. Here we are. It's like, could you call me next Tuesday for a 30 minutes topic about minutia? Oh, you can't do that? Okay, well, bye, I've got to go. When you're in a cult that says you can't talk about this because it makes me uncomfortable, because I might have to think, and I don't want to. The reality in the mathematics says that if you can't put this into language, you're stuck there. If you can't elucidate the equation that got you there, you can't get out of it. Because you don't know what, you may or may not know what number you want to change. You've got 210 here. Now, if you want to change 210 to 110, you might have to reduce this, or 105, whatever. You might have to reduce this number to 5 from a 10. But how can you reduce a number you don't know exists in a culture that doesn't teach you the underlying math behind the reality creation? It doesn't teach you the probability fields associated with different behavior, because that would be intelligent. You've got to witness the equation. You've got to grasp the probability field that you're in. You've got to learn the terrain of the mathematics that you're in. And you're going to learn that by putting them into language. Because you cannot think a thought. We're blind here, right? When you get into a horrific event and you don't know how you got there and you feel your survival is threatened, you're blind. Pain is loud. And it's like, where do I go? Where do I go? And you reach to your leader, please help me. If they throw your hand back and say, no, you see, in this situation, you getting out of this hell isn't in my interest, because I don't want to be exposed in my incompetence. I don't want the world to know what happened. So the fact that you could get out if you knew what happened and the world knew what happened isn't in my adaptive personality's coping mechanism of interest. So I'm going to throw you back into the pot there. And so you figure it out, just don't expose me. It's not terribly personal. It's, these adaptive personalities, they're not empathic enough to be personal. They're panic-based, shame-based, trauma-based coping mechanisms, often addictions. And addictions are always the primary loyalty. If an addiction is present, the person is married to the addiction more than to the well-being of themselves or anyone else. The addiction is what is keeping pain or terror or shame at a level that is manageable for that ego, for that coping mechanism. So you get thrown under the bus to protect the addiction. The addiction does not get thrown under the bus to protect the individuals involved, which is why addictions are so destructive and so dangerous, which is why it is so destructive and so dangerous to have sociopathic elements in the cult be so loud that the pain for individuals is so high that 1 in 7 Americans has a noticeable substance addiction. Gabor Mate has shown conclusively that if there are healthy alternatives available with certainty, the person can transcend, the addiction is not drawn to it. If there is pain and sociopathic protocols awaiting the individual on the other side of the addiction, for the most part, they'll do anything necessary to avoid that pain. So you have to witness, you have to understand the equation. Now, there are no observers in reality. This is if you're watching this, you're not an observer. You're a participant. You're a part of the fractal pattern that decides your posture around this data. This cult is filled with defenses to make sure that its individuals do not digest this data. It's filled with them. Oh, that's very uncool. Who gives a shit? Who said cool was intelligent? It's not. Oh, that takes too much time. What, then watching 5 hours of binging Netflix? Oh, it's way too much time to be empowered, right? Or, that's very heady. Thinking is a little bit too hard, after going through school and learning to be dumb, thinking a little bit too hard. There's tons of judgments and protections. Oh, we don't have time. After I scheduled my video games and my porn and my tennis and my rush around to get a degree for something that's irrelevant, but I need a degree, of course. And then I've got this, and then I've got that, and I've got to go drinking, of course. I just don't have the time to understand my own life. Oh my goodness, it's like it's absolutely bizarre how passionate we are in our ignorance, how passionate we are in defending. But you've got to see the data. You've got to understand the equation. Now, the magic of the witness, and this is why articulation, there's a connection, an intersection between language and thought. You cannot think without language. And so to think, you have to put it into language. To do an equation, you have to measure the math. It is essential in transforming the equation. If you want to do it consciously, you can luck in and out of it and fly blind. People do that all the time. They just hunker down and wait till the reality changes. They're scared of a relationship. They stop answering the phone. They just let the person leave 60 messages, and after they're not dead and they're sitting there in their huddled place hiding, after they're not dead a month later, they're like, oh, now I can relax. I escaped the equation that I don't know how to solve. I didn't show respect for the other person. I didn't learn how to not do it the next time. I just learned that I'm scared and I'm not going to engage with reality. And that's a good response for a child. And we stay children when anytime we start thinking, our parents start hitting us or shaming or humiliating us to make sure that we stop. Because coping mechanisms and secrets come out when thinking takes place. And so, heaven forbid our teenagers actually understand all the incompetence called love being dished out to them in their generation by the grown-up children around them, or we'd be in a tizzy all the time. So when you witness something, you have to put it into language to witness it consciously. You have to spell out the math. You have to put it into words. And there is a persona that is the one that is viewing the part of you that is in it. So I'm in this reality of PTSD and rage and shame and this and that and the other. And there's a whole set of variables that are creating that equation. And there are no witnesses. There are only participants. This is one of the fundamental discoveries of subatomic physics. The witness changes the outcome. The outcome is different because of the witness. Even defying rules of time, as in the split, the double slit test, where the photon makes a decision at the speed of light, or what happens here affects something way over there faster than the speed of. There's these interesting dynamics. But the bottom line is, your being here changes the field of here. And it either changes it into more judgment, more panic, more trauma, more reactivity, more self-pity, more this, or it changes towards more leadership, more transformation, towards more of the warrior, towards more of the. It changes the field. You are part of the variables. just as I am, just as every other person in the field. And if 270 people around this field are lucidly transparent and communicative about their lives and the various mathematics about getting to this moment, this event can be largely understood. And one of the benefits of blowing it up, like why not do it all in the inner psyche? I've done a lot of that. Why bring in 270 people and do the same event just at a larger lens? You see, when you have to use a large lens to encompass the group, but the benefit that you get is that the 270 points of the group provide more nuance. So when you use a group rather than an individual psyche, most of us don't have the training to go that deep into this persona and then this persona and this within us. So it's helpful to have the group represent us in the probability field, or at least the part of us that are cult trained, because there may be parts of us that have nothing to do with our outer cult that we've nurtured on the inside, and they're not going to be represented in the cult. Even if you bring 1,000 people, no one's going to be relating to that 1 per 1,000. But the response of secrecy, of punishing, of bullying, of using mass, of let's protect the organization by hiding everything as opposed to figuring it out, those things will be represented fractally in 270 people around this event. The desire to hide and let it go away and not talk about it, those will be right and left all over, because a majority of the psyche has learned that secrecy in this cult is a better survival strategy than authenticity and transparency. And so it will be zoomed in. If you read a book about the deep mechanisms of 270 people around this event, who runs away, who does this, who says I ran away because I didn't want this to come out about me, or I didn't want to feel bad that I did that before. So if you understand all of that pattern, you will see what's been trained inside the culturally sanctioned psyche in your own ego, and why it takes so much courage to break the taboo of secrecy and come out. Now, the witness is the doorway out of the event. So in order to witness something, it must go into language, it must go into math. And one of the ways to bring it into math is look at national probability fields. When you understand that 1 in 7 Americans are substance addicts, when you understand that suicide has overtaken car deaths, when you understand the population in its history, that in the last industrial revolution, there were riots as printing presses and stuff started taking jobs, and there was anger that machines were taking over jobs, and we're now machining away, automating away millions upon millions of jobs without response. You can understand that we're bubbling towards that kind of valuelessness and grief and confusion, etc., that leads to violation, because we haven't cared for our people, and that's destructive. And and Yang does a good job of helping to correlate that with the election of Trump, because Trump was the only person acknowledging that core point of pain. Now, he turned around and he betrayed them, because he's in survival in a sociopathic state. But his sociopathic state helped him map out what he had to say to get elected, and it was a more accurate map. You could say that Trump is a very deep sociopath, meaning he's got a pretty good map of how to manipulate people. And when you bring that out, when you don't care for people, they vote for an unhealthy part of their own psyche that promises to get them out. That's part of the adaptive personality. And we all do it when we try and look cool rather than make a substantive investment. Going out and getting a new pair of Nikes doesn't increase well-being in any other than the cool metric. Lending that money to a woman via Kiva, wearing perfectly good shoes, brings the world into more symmetry, more well-being. Cool is not very cool. It's just preferable in a sociopathic environment. When you witness the mathematics of something, you become aware. See, the mathematics of the witness are these. If you can witness an event in its entirety, by definition, you are outside the set of the event. That's set theory. You cannot fully understand something within the set. By definition, if you develop the ability to understand the set, you are outside of the set. So what have you just done? You've escaped into the part of yourself that is bigger than the event that is traumatizing you by transcending the event through understanding and language. So the first step, and this is critical to trauma because you're flooded. You cannot navigate in that state. So you've got to get in touch with some part of you that is bigger than the part of you that is flooded with the event. And, of course, our culture is waiting to trip you up at every turn by saying, how are you, how are you, how are you, and then hurrying away when you try and tell them how you're doing, because the last thing someone wants to know is 2 or 3 hours of how you actually are. So how do you witness it? And I turn to camera because cameras don't interrupt, because cameras don't overschedule their lives, and they're waiting to learn, to grow, to respond. They're doing, a much better job than most of our culture is doing as human beings. So we can't even have friends with human beings. They have been outsourced to cameras. Which is one of the reasons we're on an epidemic of loneliness in our culture, in which many Americans do not have a single friend to where they could share this kind of thing with and have any degree of empathy or even comprehension. Well, that's a dismally small, billions of people, but not one? Not one? Hello, fucked up cult? No friends for me? No study of friendship in high school? No learning of empathy? Not even one? Not even half a friend? What does someone do other than high school shootings in an emotionally and psychologically illiterate culture to communicate something's wrong? Something's wrong, and I'm not going to lie about it. And if you won't measure emotional pain in your emotional commitment to illiteracy, how about I create some physical pain for you? Maybe that will get your attention. Or maybe you'll keep militarizing, as in the war on terror, where we have now successfully produced more terrorist and more terrorist funding as a result of our protocol of terrorizing the rest of the world with drones and bombing weddings and all invasions and this and that and the other. We have now terrorized millions of people to revenge the terror of thousands of people. And we have given PTSD a nice nest in multiple countries around the world. We've spent $1 trillion and counting of our children's money. And here's your present, boys and girls. How about you shoot up a few people? Only wouldn't it be nicer if they shot up a few people in government as opposed to their own students who are as confused and emotionally fucked up as they are? And just passing the bullying along, the isolation along, as opposed to, actually, they're not initiating it. They're just doing what their parents did to them, to the weakest people in school. But of course, we do, as materialists and as economists, pay a little bit of money because it costs money when people get shot up. It doesn't cost any money when they're depressed. So, just let them be miserable. But this is a teaching. How much pain will we create before we put emotional literacy as a priority for every high school student? By actually having a class based on science and biology about it. Well, there would be an intelligent idea, wouldn't it? Human relationships in all the business surveys account for 75% of a person's income. Well, it's a good thing your student, your child, can go to school and not only learn nothing about empathic win-win human relationships, but learn that authenticity will get you screwed over and set you up with emotional, relational incompetency so that you can go into the workplace not knowing the skill that will account for 75% of your income and success. We'll leave that to a few minorities who lucked out, not because they learned it in school, but because they survived. And so to transcend the reality in the mathematics, first of all, you have a denial pattern in our culture, and so it's got to get louder and louder until someone at least will pay attention. And, when it's 5 times more pain than you've ever felt in your whole life, yes, I'm going to pay attention. I don't know what I'm doing, of course, because I'm an American, but I'm going to begin the journey of learning. And so witness equals transcendence. And this my empathy with the bitterness and the hostility, of violence, etc., is not because I think that's optimal for anyone. It's just going to happen until we have leaders, parents, teachers, friends, lovers, therapists, until we have leaders that will show and demonstrate some of the many, many mathematical equations that are better than high school shootings and suicides and obesity and addiction and all that really do work. We're not modeling that in this cult. We're making that very hard, and so we will have this. And it's important to understand that the events are not the enemy. The data of a school shooting is not the enemy. The enemy, to the degree that you'd like a better reality than being shot up at school, is the numbers that add up to that reality. And that is an ecological framework, and that's what we're really fighting in this culture. We don't want to see that we are participants. We want to operate within the chauvinism of the isolated individual, where I didn't shoot that person over there, so it has nothing to do with me. When we may have had everything to do with the sociopathic isolation of the people in our lives that pass that on, that bring some individual to a point where they just want to scream at the top of their voice, I'm in pain and you're going to feel some of it too. God damn it, why doesn't someone do something about this? If that's the level of emotional illiteracy we raise, that is the emotional illiteracy we will get. And we are participants in our silence. So we have to understand the mathematics. And, victim mathematics are there, and they're important to understand. They're part of the process of growing up as a child, or as a hapless employee in some international conglomerate scandal where you've been set up to take. You're a victim. You have no idea. You had no idea when your boss hired you that they were hiring you to set you up to be the fall guy here. You didn't know. No way of knowing. Your high school teacher didn't say, watch out for those megalomaniac capitalists. They'll hire you, and then they'll set you up with their own crimes and disappear, and with the shell company. See, nobody told you that. They just told you capitalism, the way to the new world, putting money more ahead of human beings. Hooray, hooray. And that's all you got. And you've learned mathematics. And how's your algebra doing in this situation? So you didn't learn any of that. So you're a victim. There's no possible way your conscious mind could grasp the machinations of your cult and its Machiavellian setup to ruin not only your life, but the lives of millions of people around you, for some skewed sense of advancement with a measurement system, whether it's GDP or anything else, that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Bhutan's national happiness quotient is a lot more intelligent, and it's free, so of course we're not doing it. So witness and transcendence. You cannot transcend your cult until you understand the probability field of your cult and the variables that produce that probability field. I mean, it's not hard if you study Denmark and the United States to understand why no one in Denmark has college debt. Nor is it hard to understand why they feel happier being out of debt. There's correlations there. Debt does not bring happiness. So let's saddle all our children with debt, and then what? They'll be less happy. So you have to you cannot transcend your cult until you learn a lot of your cult, things about your cult that by its very nature it doesn't want to talk about. America is number one at not looking at all the areas it's not number one. It's number one at that for sure. It may be number one in some other areas, but it's definitely number one in irrationally asserting its greatness without looking at a lot of the underlying data. The key variable being the amount of energy in time, money, and natural resources it takes an individual to have large amounts of sustainable well-being. So that's, you cannot step outside your cult until you understand the formula that produces your cult and your participatory role in that formula. You cannot step outside a trauma until you understand the mathematics that produced the trauma, understand a map of the forces bigger than you and smaller than you that you're engaging in, and develop a new strategy that doesn't involve stepping into that. Now, once you can name the mathematics, all of you who are part of this travesty, once you can name the mathematics, you are empowered to play a different role and change some of the numbers, which will change the outcome. A single person, by the way, and that's all I am, a single person can dramatically change this landscape. And two people are 3 times more potent than one. We've got one person changing a landscape in a group environment as part of changing an individual ego design. Because one has to change one's relationship with a power structure or a group, or change the group and the power structure as part of changing one's relationship with it. A sociopathic power structure produces pockets of sociopathic experience that induce trauma and that create a sociopathic adaptive persona in the person being traumatized chronically and refused honor. That's the mathematics of it. And so once you grasp the pattern you're in and how you got there, and often it ties in with contracts signed in childhood of, or blind spots, as your parents needed to abuse you and then pretend that that was love. And so now you're looking for love and you're letting people abuse you because you don't know the difference. Well, why would you know the difference? When is the last time anyone in this cult defined love for you? No one did it for me. I had to come up with the scientific definition and do the math and see what actually was love. Being loving as an adult is certainly facilitating someone to meet their hierarchy of human needs. If you help someone survive, feel secure in their survival, develop a sense of love and belonging, move to be the person that reflects their ideals and their self-esteem, helps them develop their gifts, bring them into the world, help them feel the abundance that comes from that and leave a legacy of their, higher dreams of something bigger than themselves, I'm going to bet they're going to feel loved by you. And I'm going to call that being loving. The things you did that helped that And the things you did to undermine and destroy their esteem and did this, doesn't sound very loving to me. It doesn't really matter what you call it. But what's your definition? And how does it work? And crystallize that. And do you make time? And where do you go in this culture to figure that out? Heaven help you if you rely on therapists, given the statistical data of working with 40 people or so in our culture and in different places. So witness equals getting in touch. A witness is the one who transcends the event. Because by definition, the witness is outside the set. So the act of putting it into language in mathematics is the act of becoming conscious of a part of us that is bigger than the set that we are analyzing and witnessing. This is the first step in trauma, and it is the first step in sanity. It is insane to spend lots of energy, time, money, and natural resources to create lots of pain. That's insanity. Now, we do that all the time, but insane cultures don't analyze themselves, because that would be sane. And so the witness leads us to transcendence, which leads us to language equals understanding and redesign. You also need to know what the equation could have been. You've got 4 blocks here, and I used them to throw them at you, okay? We got a bloody nose, all right. What if we had 4 blocks and we stacked them in a tower? There is a set number of variables in a given probability field. I've got $10,000. What if rather than spending that on video games, I did this, this, and this? And how happy is the video gamer? How happy is the one who does this as a statistic? Well, I'm going to go this way. So you've got to have a new design. That's part of freedom. But if you say, okay, that's how it happened, and I have no idea how I would do it differently. I don't know what to do. You're not free. You're outside the set. You're witnessing, but you don't have freedom until you've got some concept of a redesign. This is how I could do it differently in the same situation. Now, this is, of course, harder the more negligence is involved. If 4 therapists betray you at once, obviously you can't go to therapy around that because they've all betrayed you. So it's kind of like, and there you have things like diversified investment. Whereas, Ray Dalio will talk about the single most important part in a long-term investment portfolio being the way you diversify your investment. And so if you put all your eggs in one basket, one organization, one this, you're much more vulnerable. If you plant only wheat, or as in the case of the Irish potato famine, if you have only potatoes and you have a potato mite, you get a famine because you didn't bother to have a backup plan. And so backup plans of diversified nature are better. And so there you have, various tensions, pros and cons of that. Elon Musk, on the other hand, a hero of mine, has all of his publicly traded money in his company, Tesla, which is considered a very risky company. And so but I don't think he would say that that's coming from a place of long-term, protect an investment strategy. It's coming from a place of, I want to see electric cars leading our future forward sustainably. I've got the money, I don't need it, and so I'm going to put it all in here. But you've got freedom with a redesign. And when you have change and release, that's when you resolve the traumatic state, you release the reptilian state. That's the point when you have enough certainty in the new design that you can release the energy in the old design. It's no longer teaching you. You don't need to live in that reality. You don't need to hang out with those people or do this or do that. You've released the energy, and you've got a new design that's working better, that you have certainty around. You've understood a new formula. You tried out 2 + 8 - 10, and you got a completely different number, and it's working. You've tried it a few times, and I can count on this. Now I can release myself, the energy that's contained in this pain. not in fear, like, oh my gosh, when's it going to do it again? When is life going to come up and attack me again in that way? I have no idea. I was a victim. I didn't do anything. Not in fear, but with confidence. I let this happen, and I let this happen, and I chose this, and I chose that. And yes, the me at that time didn't know another way. But I've analyzed the math. I've put it into language. I've transcended the set by witnessing it. This is the Buddhist wisdom of witnessing, where you notice your feeling, and then you be there, the one, and you discover the vastness of the self, because the witness is always bigger than whatever is being witnessed. That's mathematically imperative. If you have a lens that is capturing the entirety of an event and then some, by definition, the lens is bigger than the event being captured. So perspective is part of that. You know, as you recede in time, or as a camera person goes hundreds of yards away, their perspective gets bigger. And so they can capture more. You've got to see the pattern from outside the pattern. To see the pattern as a traumatized individual within the trauma is to re-traumatize. And this is the science of trauma that we're all ignorant about. Even therapists will tell you to talk about something and re-traumatize their client because they have not differentiated the protocol for non-traumatic events and traumatic events in a traumatically illiterate culture. And so you've got freedom when you redesign language and understanding, and you can create a new equation with a dramatically different probability field predictably. Now you're free. You are free of the event. When you change and release the old energy, you've got mastery. And mastery allows you to be of service in a certain way. From a position of mastery where you understand the digits, the code that led to this crash in the app, the code that led to restoring it, you've now got a teaching. You've now got a pattern of engagement that works superior to the old pattern of engagement. And education at its best is sharing patterns that work and discounting patterns that don't work. So with teaching comes healing, wholeness, love, a movement back to grace, because the teaching, a given protocol that creates a lot of pain is a protocol that creates unbalance and asymmetry. For example, it's asymmetrical and unbalanced for a therapist to take money to hurt the client and then take more money to hurt the client some more and then take more money to deny hurting the client. You've got this pitch, just you're going to crash. The more energy gets invested in that dynamic, the more pain and asymmetry occurs. And so you have to understand, well, how does it get to that point? What's going on? Well, then you have to understand the nature of psychedelics. The nature of psychedelics are that when you take someone for the first time in their life into a dissociative state where they can't navigate clearly, they will cling to safety. Now, if safety is defined as the therapist who is being paid to keep you safe, the person will cling to the therapist most of the time. Well, if the therapist is the cause of the imbalance, then the more they cling, the more they get imbalanced. And the more they get imbalanced, the more pain there is. And if the therapist denies it and doesn't remedy the pain, then it gets more. And if it covers it up, it gets more, because now you've got secrecy and loneliness in there. So you have to understand that the more asymmetrical and imbalanced a relationship like this becomes, the more pain will be there. And now the question becomes, should that pain be concentrated in the victim, or should that pain be shared by the circle that participated in the pain? And the mathematics are clear about that as well. You distribute the load in the circle because everyone can carry a few pounds. But if you put 2,000 pounds on one individual and scapegoat them, it crushes them. So if you want to crush people, blame it all on one person. If you want to learn and share the load, you distribute the weight equally. I'm the one that did nothing around this. I'm the one that didn't understand my job around this. I'm the one that ignored this out of fear of this. I'm the one that did this. I'm the one that said this person was competent. I'm the one, and you distribute the mathematics of the load, and everyone carries a few pounds, and they go back to a constructive power dynamic where rather than using that power to destroy and undermine the person that invested in the power structure, that all that decentralized and circular power is used to support and go back to the promise. We will use the power we asked you to give us, the power of your vulnerability, the power of your trust, the power of your time, the power of your money, the power of your risk, that we asked you to give us these things for your benefit. Then the power becomes legitimized. But you cannot go through that without analyzing the numbers. And the numbers lead into ecology. They do not lead into scapegoating. Peter Sandhill was not operating alone. He was recommended by his teacher and trainer weeks before by Ann Watts. So that we're not dealing with. And then where did Ann Watts get the idea that she knew who was good or not good at some particular thing? She wasn't trying to fuck over as many clients as possible. So where did her blindness come from? Well, that leads back to the group, because nobody told Ann Watts this, or if she did, she didn't listen. And where did her not listening come from? Well, every time she admitted doing something wrong as a child, she felt like a bad person and was unlovable, and she didn't want to feel that way, so she doesn't admit she's doing anything wrong. Well, where did that come from? You cannot isolate an individual and say they have nothing to do with the group. We do that all the time, and it's punitive and it's ineffectual. It's why we don't see systemic change in our culture. We see people taking the hit for a fucked up protocol and a new face coming into a fucked up protocol. Nothing changes. Nothing changes until everyone involved does the math and puts it into words. And, of course, does clear math, data-based math, as opposed to 2 + 2 = 800, because I said so. Doesn't it equal 800? And so you have teaching, you have healing. The healing is a return to symmetry. The wholeness is a return to symmetry. The wholeness, the healing, is a return to grace, the grace of the sphere. The grace of the sphere is the return to intelligence. Intelligence is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. Intelligence is synonymous with competency, which creates the abundance that leads to love, that leads to beauty, that leads to transcendence, that leads to gratitude, to joy. You don't have to push for love. When a beautiful environment is competently created, love is what emerges naturally. Loving and winning, competency and love are the same thing. Intelligence and competency are the same thing. And so, when I discovered that the most positive and the most negative emotional, psychological, physical states of my life were associated with the equation of my professional relationship with Peter Sandhill and my professional relationship with the Human Awareness Institute, workshops and facilitators, and then board. And I started piecing the math together. I understood that 99% of the people in this culture would be damaged by the abuse of power exercised by the high facilitators and Peter Sandhill as they influenced me in their roles to go in the exact opposite direction of my well-being on multiple occasions. And that creates a probability field. The probability field of having therapists and leaders of community embodying grossly dysfunctional protocols of behavior that don't work. If you take a sampling, a good sampling, for example, let's take 100, we have to deal with the data that I pushed on the situation because the facilitators didn't ask any questions. So, of course, they didn't know anything about what they didn't ask. And that's a form of negligence as well. A doctor, you go into a doctor, they say, do you have allergies to this and this? They try and learn about you. But so influence without learning is statistically abusive because most of the time you're going to do the wrong thing. But secondly, if you take 100 highly sensitive men with Asperger's type tendencies of my generation in America, and you induce, first of all, with and then you look at the abuse history and stuff, and then you induce a high dose forced psychedelic session in a container of secrecy, and sexually escalate the relationship while under the influence of psychedelics for $175 an hour, and make promises you don't keep and push against clear, healthy requests, don't show up on time, and then cover it all up and ask the client to sign a contract of secrecy. I would say that 100% of the men lined up to participate in that experiment or that abuse protocol will end up severely damaged if they trust the facilitators enough to trust Peter Sandhill, and then trust Peter Sandhill enough to go along with most of that. I would say that 100% of the people will end up severely damaged by that behavior. And that as a result, changing that behavior and the variables that lead to it, to be competent, ethical, and loving, High must put that as its highest priority. By putting instead its highest priority, making the information secret from its clients, the law, and the community, it is further abusing its power and setting itself up to cause more and more pain, and in either a gentle or a violent revolution, end its power structure, because that's what the mathematics dictate for life to continue. For life to continue, the masses of energy that have been gathered based on public trust cannot be used to abuse the public indefinitely at that level of pain in a protocol where an apology is too much for these individuals. And that was the breaking point, the refusal to apologize. And so, having witnessed all of this, I now understand how the high authorities are copying our governmental authorities. The default mode is what occurs until you consciously break the cycle. I understand the damage it causes. I understand that if you learn deeply what's happening in this domain, you will understand abuse in all aspects of your life, and you can make a positive change. I understand how much fight there has been to shut up this voice, and how much resistance, and that you are a participant in that resistance, as well as perhaps a reluctant opener up to some of the data. And that this is what is destroying our culture. This fractal pattern, repeated a few million times, in one way or another. You can take out psychedelics and put in roofies. You can take out psychedelics and put in premature sex. You can take out psychedelics and do financial negligence and abuse and covering that up. That's what's destroying our culture. It's creating evil. And it will do so until the pain gets loud enough that a certain number of people do the math and demand protocols that work maybe 80% of the time, rather than doing a protocol that is going to damage 99 to 100% of all people who go through it. Let's demand protocols and accountability that work 80% of the time. And try that. And then rather than asking the victims of incompetence to pay the penalty for the violations of leadership, let's ask leadership to pay the penalty and the price and share it. Because that will increase learning. Because when you betray someone asking for help, it's always done out of fear. Fear of what? Fear of pain. When you decide that a leader is more motivated out of fear and pain, and fear of pain and fear of shame, which is another form of pain, than empathy, they will do whatever will help them avoid the pain. Now, that's not leadership. That's coping mechanism. But for a leader in a role of leadership who's in that state, the only way to pivot them somewhat indirectly and incompetently towards ethical behavior is to make it more painful for them to pay the price of their pain management strategy than to not. Because this system has cost me 4 years, loss of life expectancy, addiction, more than $400,000 and counting, tremendous. So if that price was handed as the bill, as Peter Sandhill was lying about this or doing this, do you think he would have said, I'd rather tell the truth than pay $300,000 or $400,000? No, it just felt good to him rather than admit that he didn't know what he was doing. So if I say this, looks like I know what I'm doing. If I say this, I have to admit I don't know what I'm doing and I don't feel comfortable with that. But hey, if I have to pay $400,000, I'd rather be uncomfortable, And so you're going to do it's not ideal. But within shame, fear-based individuals in some domain, and we all have that terrain unless we've healed and resolved all of our trauma in a culture that produces it faster than it heals it, there are areas where we're going to act out of fear of a pain we can't deal with. And this is the real crisis, and we're all in it. And so my choice was simply, when I realized I didn't know any of the other variables, I didn't know if I would live, I didn't know if I'd go bankrupt, I didn't know any of that, because it's all unknown to me. And one of the most frightening things to realize is that when the entire facilitator board acted in a way that was so shocking that I would never have expected it, it implicates me. It says, Dane, you do not have the discernment capability to decide who is safe and who is not in your world, because you ranked them as one of the safest people, and they have hurt you more than anyone has ever hurt you on all dimensions, in unexpected ways. That means I cannot rely on this map to trust anyone, because they would have been first on my list if I met them again and didn't know this. That's a problem, because I don't know this about anyone else. I just know that I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm in more pain than I've ever been in, and I can't turn to help to anyone because therapists fucked this up in the first place, and I'm not confident that they know what they're doing. Or I wouldn't have had to learn what trauma was from a cafe, a guy in a cafe. I sat down, what are you up to? Taking a trauma workshop. What's trauma? Well, it's this, this, and this. Oh, that's what trauma is. I've got trauma. Well, that's what I'm doing. Well, how do you learn about trauma? Well, read this book. Stranger in a Cafe, Better Than 40 Therapists. And so I read the book, and I understood the dynamic. But very, very disturbingly, I understood that I had demonstrated fight, flight, freeze symptoms. I even told the person I did the most work with, I said, I'm going through my reality in this situation, and suddenly I freeze, and I can't move, and I don't know what to do about it. And the only way I can start moving again is if I leave that environment or go there with another person. I freeze up when I'm alone here. That's freeze, as loud as you can say it if you don't know the language of trauma. And he said, that's interesting. Come back next week and talk about it. He had absolutely no idea to recommend a trauma book, to use the language of trauma, to do nothing. Just reactivate the trauma by talking about it some more. Complete incompetence. Very noble about it as well. I confronted him about that, and he doesn't know what he doesn't know, and he's certainly not going to admit he made any mistakes, because in this culture you get punished. You don't get helped when you admit you need help. As I learned when I asked the community for help and was instead told what a jerk I was, it's like, wow, well, I guess that's why we don't ask for help in this cult. Well, not asking for help in this cult has a huge mathematical repercussion in the probability field. And so throughout this whole dynamic, I've always known there's a part of me that's outside of the set. One of the pleasures of the thought of dying is to get out of the mathematical equation and get to hang out with the parts of me that aren't stuck in it. So, the more I talk, the more outside the set, the more I'm a witness, which means bigger than the issue. But I also understand that this issue will not change for you, for me, for anyone else, until we as a cult, that's what we are. We're not intelligent. We're not sane or brilliant or anything like that. We're in a cult that does things a certain way. And in the area of emotional illiteracy, relational illiteracy, traumatic illiteracy, scapegoating and shame the victim, we are a fucked up cult. All cults are fucked up in some ways, but in these areas we are incredibly screwed. And and screwing screws everyone. Everyone loses. So I've focused on the paradigm of putting the mathematics of impact into language as an unwelcome gift. The story of Sleeping Beauty talks about the fact of what happens when you exclude part of the circle. The relatives that are inherent in the birth of any child, they come in the family system, and these are mythologized in our fairy tales, etc. When we banish and say one of our relatives is not to be talked about, we leave a void in the child's psyche where that relative has influence on the ecology of the family system, but the child has no knowledge of it consciously because that relative has been banished from the conscious ecology of the family system. And this creates anomalous data. It creates math that doesn't work. Because mom wants to say 2 plus 2 equals 700. You say, no, it doesn't. There's got to be some missing number in there. Where is this 700 coming from? She said, don't talk to mom. Don't you sass me about that. This is the outcome, and these are the only numbers you need to know about. I see. So there's a missing equation in there that somehow adds up to 700, or that 700 is a lie. And you cannot sort out your reality in that kind of insanity. You've got to break the taboo. And of course, in Sleeping Beauty, one of the relatives is not invited. In the conversation in the group with the high facilitators, the victim of sexual abuse was the only person not invited to the circle to discuss what to do about sexual abuse in the high power structure. One of the elders wasn't invited. And of course she was invited because she wasn't invited because she was bad. She was taboo. And so of course we don't talk about that. And so we decide who's good and bad, and then we exclude the bad people. We're great at creating the illusion of garbage with things we don't know what to do with. So not invited. Whenever an energy is part of a system but is unconscious, not invited, and excluded, it curses. It draws out the negative attention of that energy. And what's been interesting, of course, is to notice that in the fundamental circle of exclusion of the facts that are most liberating to bring high into an age of emotional and traumatic literacy, the person most shamed and pained has been the one excluded. Well, anyone in psychology or energy dynamics or electricity design knows what happens when you take large amounts of energy and start pushing it and polarizing rather than including it and telling the truth, letting it be part of the equation. It becomes your nemesis, not because of its nature, but because it is the nature of what is unconsciously, willfully suppressed, denied, and lied to and hidden. It is the nature of whatever we do that to in ourselves and in others, that is the bit that trips us up. Why? Because we're blind and ignorant. So, of course, Sleeping Beauty falls asleep for 100 years because she's tripped up by her parents' inability to invite the full family system to the blessing, to the christening, to the time of blessing. They put their child to sleep for 100 years, pretending, of course, that wasn't anything to do with them. She's an evil witch. That's what we do with people that we don't know how to integrate into our cult. We just turn them into an illusionary garbage and then exclude them on the basis that we're right, that they're garbage, rather than that we don't know what we're doing and that we're cursing ourselves with ignorance and incompetence by refusing to step outside the narrow bands of our dogma to incorporate more and more data so that we can be a science and thus competent and thus love-based cult, as opposed to a shame, punishment, secret-based cult, which always ends in failure.